This is the unbelievable story of how a simple HOA dispute turned into a nightmare I never could have imagined. One day I'm going about my business, just trying to be a good parent, when suddenly my 5-year-old daughter goes missing. What I didn't know was that an HOA Karen had taken matters into her own hands and kidnapped my daughter from school. But it gets worse. As if that wasn't enough, just as I'm reeling from the shock, her husband serves me divorce papers, shattering everything I thought I knew about my family. You won't believe how this horrifying situation unfolded, so stay with me and watch until the end. The twists and turns will leave you speechless, and trust me, this is a story you won't want to miss. It started off as a regular Tuesday morning. The sky was clear, the birds were chirping, and I sent my daughter off to school with a kiss, as I always did. She was only 5, but she was already so full of life, laughing, running around with her friends, and always bringing a smile to everyone she met. Her bright eyes and boundless energy made it clear she was ready to take on the world, and as a parent, all I could do was nurture her and support her as she grew. I had no reason to believe that this day would be any different from any other. My morning routine was predictable, comforting even, taking care of household chores, work, a cup of coffee to get through the day, and a few texts to check in with family and friends. The worries I typically had were the small ones, the ones that came with parenting, like making sure she had her homework done or checking that she hadn't hurt herself playing outside. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. The day unfolded normally at first. I worked, answered emails, and ran errands, all while keeping my thoughts with my daughter at school. I often found myself wondering what she was doing. Was she playing with her friends? Was she enjoying snack time? I never imagined I would get the call that would change everything. When the phone rang, I saw the caller ID, the school. My heart instantly skipped a beat. The voice on the other end was calm, but there was an urgency I couldn't ignore. "We have a situation here, and we need you to come down immediately." I heard the words, but they didn't make sense. My mind raced. What situation? Why did they need me so urgently? The calm tone of the voice only added to my growing anxiety. There was a sense of unease in my gut that I couldn't shake. Something was wrong. I immediately dropped everything and rushed out the door, feeling the panic start to rise. When I arrived at the school, my mind was reeling. The principal greeted me at the door, his face tight, his posture rigid, which only added to the mounting dread that clouded my thoughts. He told me what I feared most, that my daughter had been taken. I stood frozen for a moment, the world around me suddenly feeling unreal. Taken? My first reaction was disbelief. There had to be some mistake. There was no way my daughter had been taken. But the principal's face said it all. The blood drained from my face as I asked, "What do you mean, taken? Where is she?" He led me inside, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every beat seeming to echo in my ears. The walls of the school, which had always felt like a safe haven for my daughter, now seemed cold and distant. We hurried to the school office, where they showed me the security footage. I watched as the footage played, showing my daughter holding hands with a woman. But it wasn't just any woman. The image of the woman made my stomach drop. It was a woman I recognized all too well, an HOA Karen from our neighborhood. The same woman who had been causing trouble with the neighborhood association for months. She had been a thorn in my side over the last few weeks, making complaints about everything from the condition of my lawn to the fence I had repaired. I never imagined that she would go this far. The footage continued to play, showing my daughter walking out of the school building with this woman hand in hand. My daughter's face was a mixture of confusion and trust, clearly not understanding the gravity of the situation. The woman was speaking softly to her, likely trying to calm her down or reassure her, but the fact remained, this woman had no right to take my daughter. No permission had been given, and she had walked right past the school's security with ease, somehow convincing them that she was authorized to pick up my daughter. How could this have happened? The school had protocols in place to prevent something like this, yet somehow my daughter had been led away from the safety of the school. As the realization hit me, I felt a surge of panic. I was powerless to stop it, and I had no idea where my daughter was. The confusion, the fear, the helplessness, it all came crashing down in that moment. How could she do this? How could someone I knew from my own neighborhood be capable of such a thing? What could she possibly want with my daughter? The principal was already on the phone with the authorities, trying to figure out how the woman had bypassed security and why she had taken my daughter without any explanation. My thoughts were racing, but one thing was clear. I had to find my daughter. I had to get her back, no matter what. This wasn't just about a missing child. It was a violation of everything I stood for. My daughter was everything to me, and someone had just stolen her. I couldn't stand idly by while this woman had her in her custody, and I couldn't rest until I knew my daughter was safe. As the minutes passed, I felt more and more out of control. Every second felt like an eternity. I had no idea where she had taken her, how long they'd been gone, or even if my daughter was okay. I couldn't breathe. Every moment was filled with the fear that I might never see my daughter again, that this woman would somehow succeed in taking her from me. But I had to push past that fear, focus on the task at hand, and find my daughter before it was too late. At that moment, I knew everything had changed. This was no longer a simple day, and my life had been turned upside down by a person I never expected to hurt me in such a profound way. What had started as an ordinary Tuesday morning was now a nightmare, and I had no idea what the next steps would bring. But I was going to fight with everything I had to get my daughter back, no matter what it took. The footage on the screen only made the situation worse. There, clear as day, was my daughter walking with a woman I recognized far too well. It was the HOA Karen, the same woman who had been making my life difficult for months, with constant complaints about my property, harassing me about minor issues with the neighborhood rules and regulations. The woman had come to the school under the pretense of being me, claiming she was there to pick up my daughter. The footage showed my daughter walking out of the school building, holding this woman's hand, looking slightly confused, but following her anyway. The woman's voice was clear on the security tape, and she was speaking to my daughter gently, trying to reassure her that she was there to take her for an appointment I had never heard of, an appointment I hadn't authorized. The woman had no right to be there, and yet there was my daughter, walking away with a total stranger, unknowingly trusting someone who was taking her away from safety. I could feel my chest tighten as the footage played on, showing my daughter being led out the door. The school had no idea this was happening, and when they checked their records, it was confirmed that no one had called to authorize this pickup. The school was supposed to have strict procedures in place for situations like this, yet somehow this woman had bypassed it all. They couldn't believe it either. The principal's face mirrored my own shock as he reviewed the security footage with me. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, calculated move on her part. The woman had walked right into the school, had taken my daughter without any permission, and had used her knowledge of the system to get away with it. The shock quickly turned to anger as the full weight of the situation sank in. How could she do this? Why would she take my daughter? It wasn't just about the power plays she had been making in our neighborhood as part of the HOA board. This was something far more sinister. She had crossed a line that could never be undone. My daughter, the one person in the world who mattered more to me than anything else, had been taken from me, and I was helpless to stop it. The realization that she had been manipulated and used as a pawn in some twisted game was enough to make my heart break all over again. It wasn't just the theft of my daughter that hurt. It was the betrayal. I had known this woman. I had seen her at HOA meetings, and I had dealt with her complaints. But I had never imagined she would go this far, using my own child in her scheme. As the minutes dragged on, my panic began to rise. The fear, the uncertainty, the crushing feeling of powerlessness, every part of me screamed to do something, anything, to get my daughter back. But I didn't know where she had taken her. I didn't know where to start looking, how to get my child back into my arms. I tried to steady myself, to hold it together, but it felt impossible. The images from the footage kept replaying in my head. My daughter, confused, walking with this woman, trusting her completely. It was as if my world had suddenly been turned upside down, and I was caught in the middle of something I never imagined I would face. I felt completely out of control. My daughter was somewhere out there, with a woman who had no business being with her, and I had no way of knowing where they were. What if something happened to her? What if this woman had some sort of plan that went beyond just taking her away for a simple appointment? What was she going to do next? Every scenario that ran through my mind only made the fear worse. The pit in my stomach grew deeper as I realized that I couldn't trust anyone to keep her safe. My daughter was with a stranger, and it felt like my entire world was crumbling beneath me. The one person I was supposed to protect, the one person who trusted me with everything, had been taken from me by someone who had no right to do so. As I stood in the school office, I tried my best to stay composed. I knew I had to act quickly, but everything felt like a blur. I was paralyzed with the weight of the situation, but I also knew I couldn't afford to waste time. My daughter was out there, somewhere, and I had to get her back before it was too late. I had to stay strong, for her, and for myself. The school called the authorities, and I did everything I could to get a lead, trying to think of any place the woman could have taken my daughter. But the uncertainty of not knowing where to start, not knowing who I could trust, was overwhelming. Could barely breathe. The fear gnawed at me as the minutes ticked by. What had started as a normal morning had turned into my worst nightmare. My daughter had been stolen, and I didn't know where she was. The confusion was unbearable. I tried to hold back the panic, but it was hard. Every second felt like an eternity. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The woman had taken my daughter from me, and I couldn't rest until I knew she was safe again. This wasn't just about being upset. This was about my child's safety, her future, and I would do whatever it took to make sure she came home. The full reality of the situation was starting to sink in, and the only thing on my mind was getting my daughter back. No matter what it took, no matter where I had to go, I was going to find her, and I wasn't going to stop until I did. The fear, the confusion, the helplessness, it was all there, but my determination outweighed it all. I wasn't going to let her be taken from me without a fight. My daughter would come home and I would be the one to bring her back. Just as I was about to escalate the situation with the police and do everything in my power to find my daughter, another bombshell dropped, and it shook me to the core. While I was pacing, frantic and trying to hold myself together, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I didn't even think to question who it could be. My mind was still racing with thoughts of where my daughter might be, how she was doing, and why this woman had done this to us. I opened the door, and standing there, looking more out of place than I had ever seen him, was my soon-to-be ex-husband. His face was expressionless, but there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite read, something that made me feel uneasy. He handed me a small envelope, his hand trembling just slightly. "This is for you," he said, barely making eye contact. My mind went blank as I took the envelope from his hand, not sure what was going on. I was already in a state of shock and panic, dealing with the horror of my daughter being kidnapped, and yet somehow I felt an unsettling sense of dread rise in me as I opened the envelope. When I saw the contents, my stomach dropped. Divorce. Papers. The words on the page seemed to blur before my eyes. Divorce papers. From my husband. The very last thing I needed right now was to process the end of my marriage, not when my daughter was still out there with a woman who had no business taking her. The reality of what was happening set in as the weight of everything crashed over me. Here I was, fighting to get my daughter back from the grip of an HOA Karen, and now, my husband, who I thought would be my partner in this fight, was turning his back on me. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the papers, my hands shaking as the reality of the situation overwhelmed me. I couldn't find the words. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest that it drowned out everything else. The divorce, on top of everything else, felt like a betrayal. The man I had trusted, the person who had promised to stand by me, was now serving me papers, making it clear that he wanted out. He had chosen this moment of all moments to walk away from everything we had built together. I looked up at him, searching his face for some explanation. Why now? Why at this moment? I asked, my voice breaking despite my efforts to keep it steady. I had no energy left to fight for him, but I needed to understand why this was happening now, of all times. I had been juggling the pressures of the HOA, my daughter's well-being, and keeping our home together, and now, the one person I thought would help me through this was adding to the chaos. I couldn't fathom it. I felt defeated, overwhelmed, and betrayed all at once. He sighed, rubbing his forehead before finally speaking. I've been talking to Karen's husband, he said, his voice quiet, almost apologetic. He's been telling me things that have made me realize we've been living separate lives for too long. The pressure, the constant arguments, the way you've been handling everything. It's just too much. I've made up my mind. I want out. His words were like a slap in the face. The timing couldn't have been worse. While I was desperately trying to hold everything together, trying to be strong for my daughter, he had already been talking to the very people who had caused me so much stress. Karen's husband, who had fueled the tensions between us through his own manipulative games, had somehow gotten through to my husband, and now it was all falling apart. I couldn't believe it. How could he allow himself to be influenced? Like this? How could he not see that I was fighting for our daughter's safety, trying to hold on to something real, while he was allowing our marriage to disintegrate? The tears started to well up, but I fought them back, my chest tightening with every breath. I couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Not when my daughter was still missing. But the weight of everything that had happened that day was almost too much to bear. I was dealing with the loss of my daughter. Someone had taken her right out of the safety of her school, and now my marriage, the one relationship I thought I could count on through it all, was ending in the worst possible way. The sense of betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just the divorce that hurt. It was the realization that he had already decided, and I was left to deal with the aftermath alone. My husband took a step back, perhaps realizing that his timing was as terrible as his words. He seemed to wait for me to say something, but there was nothing left to say. He had already made his choice, and no amount of pleading or reasoning would change that. I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I held it in, knowing that now wasn't the time to fight over something that had already been decided. My mind was elsewhere, focused entirely on my daughter. What was happening to her? Was she scared? Was she okay? I can't do this right now, I said, my voice trembling as I held the divorce papers tightly in my hand. I'm not dealing with this. Not now. I have to focus on getting my daughter back. With that, I walked away, leaving my husband standing in the doorway. I couldn't deal with him. Not today. Not when there was still so much at stake. My daughter needed me, and I couldn't waste another second in this nightmare of a situation. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling of loss. My daughter was gone, and now, so was my marriage. The door shut behind me, and I stood there for a moment, staring at the floor, feeling the weight of it all. The betrayal, the pain, the uncertainty, it was all too much. But there was no time to dwell on it. I had a daughter to find, and I wouldn't rest until she was safe in my arms again. I couldn't let everything fall apart. The thought of losing both my daughter and my family in one go was simply unbearable. I couldn't allow myself to succumb to despair, not when my little girl was out there somewhere, at the mercy of someone who had no right to take her. The emotional toll was wearing on me. The minutes, the hours, seemed to stretch endlessly as I grappled with the uncertainty of her safety. The panic, the fear, and the devastation that gripped me at every waking moment only grew more intense as time passed. I tried to focus, to remain calm, but my mind kept spiraling. Where was she? Was she okay? Had this woman hurt her in any way? I couldn't shake the thought of my daughter, alone in the world, far away from home and without anyone to protect her. The feeling of powerlessness was overwhelming, and I could hardly breathe thinking about what she might be going through. Knew I had to act fast. I had to do everything I could to bring her home, and I couldn't waste another second. My heart was racing as I reached out to the authorities, my voice shaky as I relayed every detail I could about the woman who had taken my daughter. I gave them everything, her name, her appearance, any interactions I had ever had with her, and even the events leading up to the kidnapping. The police acted quickly, launching an investigation and setting up a task force to search for my daughter. The thought of her being so far away, with this stranger who had no right to take her, was unbearable. But I had no choice. I had to trust the authorities to do what they could to find her, while I tried to hold myself together for the long and grueling process ahead. Hours turned into days, but the search was ongoing. The police scoured the area, questioned neighbors, and even went door to door, but the trail was cold. It wasn't until I received a phone call that things started to change. It was the police, and they had a lead. Someone had seen the woman driving down a narrow, remote road just outside of town, a road that I had never heard of. The tip was small, but it was something. The search was expanded, and soon we were looking in areas I didn't even know existed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt surreal, like a bad dream. The woman had taken my daughter somewhere far from home, somewhere isolated. My heart pounded as I made my way to the location, not knowing what I was going to find, but desperate to get to my daughter as quickly as possible. The hours dragged on as we followed the leads, each one taking us closer, but still feeling too far away. It felt like an eternity, the thought of my daughter getting farther and farther from me with every passing minute. But finally, after what seemed like endless searching, we found her. The relief that flooded me was instant, overwhelming, but mixed with an intense wave of anger. There she was, my precious little girl, standing in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She was unharmed physically, but I could see the terror in her face. The relief was almost too much to bear. I rushed to her, dropping to my knees to pull her into my arms. Her small, trembling body clung to me as if she had been waiting for this moment, and I could feel her breath hitch in my chest as she finally relaxed in my embrace. She was safe. She was with me again. But even as the relief washed over me, the anger, betrayal, and heartbreak didn't disappear. My daughter was safe, but the damage had already been done. This woman had taken her from me, and I had no idea why. What had driven her to such extremes? What had possessed her to think she could take someone else's child? It wasn't just about the physical safety of my daughter, it was the emotional toll this had taken on all of us. My relationship with my daughter, the bond that had been built through years of love and trust, had been shattered, even if only for a moment. I could see the signs of her fear, the way she looked at me as though she was still uncertain if everything was going to be okay. That look alone told me that her trust had been broken, and that was the hardest part. As a parent, Your greatest fear is that you won't be there to protect your child when they need you the most. And in that moment, I had failed her, even though I knew I hadn't. But the emotional scars would take time to heal. The journey home felt like a blur. My daughter, safe in my arms, seemed to settle into a sense of comfort. But the weight of what had just happened weighed heavily on both of us. I could tell she was still processing what had happened, still unsure if the world she knew was truly safe. I held her close, whispering that everything was okay now, that she was safe. But even as I said the words, I knew it would take time for her to fully understand that it was over. As we drove back, I felt the overwhelming urge to protect her, to never let anyone hurt her again. The world felt different now. It felt colder, darker, like a place where bad things could happen when you least expected it. I knew I had a long road ahead of me to rebuild what had been shattered, to heal my daughter's sense of safety, and to repair our bond. But that would come in time. For now I had her, and that was all that mattered. We would move forward together, and I would do everything in my power to ensure that this never happened again. The emotional weight of the situation still lingered, but the one thing I knew for sure was that I wouldn't let anything break me, or my family apart. I had my daughter back, and that was my victory. We would rebuild, we would heal, and we would move forward stronger than before. After everything that had happened, I knew I couldn't just walk away. The emotional turmoil of the situation was still fresh, but I had a responsibility to my daughter, to myself, and to the future. What the HOA Karen had done went far beyond a simple property dispute. It was a direct attack on my family. She had stolen my child, manipulated the system, and violated everything I held dear. This wasn't just about one woman causing trouble. It was about ensuring that she couldn't harm anyone else, especially not in such a cruel and calculated way. It was about standing up for what was right, about taking back control, and about protecting my family from people like her. The first step was clear. I had to make sure she faced consequences for her actions. I couldn't let her get away with it. I contacted a lawyer and began the process of filing legal action against her. My first move was to apply for a restraining order, something that would prevent her from coming near my daughter and me ever again. It was crucial that she knew there would be consequences for her behavior. At the same time, I worked with the police, ensuring that she was held accountable for the kidnapping and the emotional distress she had caused us. I wasn't going to let this go. It wasn't just about making sure she couldn't harm my daughter again. It was about setting a precedent, about ensuring that no one else could take advantage of the system the way she had. I wanted to make sure she couldn't do this to anyone else. But as I dealt with the legal side of things, I couldn't avoid the harsh reality of what had happened to my marriage. The divorce papers my husband had handed me were a constant reminder of how things had fallen apart. At first, I was angry. Angry at him for leaving me in the middle of this nightmare, angry at him for giving up on our family when I needed him most. But as time went on, I realized that the breakdown of my marriage wasn't something I could blame entirely on him or on the situation we were facing. It wasn't just the kidnapping that had driven us apart. It was the cracks that had been there for a long time, the emotional distance that had grown over the years. I had been so focused on my daughter's safety and on fixing the issues with the HOA that I had neglected my marriage. And while it was painful, I had to acknowledge that our relationship had been deteriorating long before this tragedy. I wasn't going to let the failure of my marriage define me, though. My priority now was rebuilding my life, focusing on my daughter's emotional well-being and making sure she felt safe again. I found strength I didn't know I had, a resilience that came from being a mother, from loving my daughter with everything I had. Despite the emotional exhaustion, I stood up for what mattered. I couldn't let the past hold me back. My daughter had been through a trauma that no child should have to endure, and it was my job to help her heal. Together, we would rebuild, and I would protect her from anything and anyone who threatened her happiness and safety. By the end of it all, I had regained control over my life, but it wasn't easy. The process of healing, both emotionally and legally, was slow, but each day brought a small victory. I had my daughter back, safe and sound, and I vowed that I would never let anyone take her from me again. The legal actions I had taken against the HOA Karen ensured that she couldn't harm us anymore, and I made sure to sever any ties with her and her husband. My marriage had ended, yes, but I knew that I was capable of rebuilding a new, stronger life. Most importantly, I had learned the value of standing up for what's right. It was a difficult, painful journey, but it was one that ultimately led to empowerment. I learned that I could protect my family no matter how far people were willing to go to hurt us. The strength I found in myself and in my love for my daughter was the foundation of my healing. We had been through so much, but I knew we were stronger because of it. We were survivors, and no one would ever take that away from us. In the end, I came to terms with the idea that while some things couldn't be fixed, others could be rebuilt. My family was my priority, and no matter how hard it got, I would continue to fight for them. The journey wasn't easy, but it was mine, and I was ready to face whatever came next, stronger and more resilient than ever before. What would you do if someone tried to tear your family apart like this? Don't miss out on more incredible, real-life stories of betrayal, resilience, and the fight to protect what's yours. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another shocking video. Share this video to spread the word about what happens when someone takes things too far, and drop a comment below. Have you ever had a confrontation like this? Let's talk about it. Stay tuned for more on the HOA stories, where justice always finds its way.